And Jesus himself said that he did not come to do away with the law.
Not take us out of this world if he does not want us to be contaminated by it.
This is the Adventist Pilgrimage Podcast with your hosts, Michael Campbell and Greg Howell.
Welcome to the Adventist Pilgrimage Podcast. I'm kind of excited about this particular episode because, frankly, I don't get to see the people that I talk to in person very often on these things. And today we've got a really special guest. So, Michael, we are in San Francisco.
We are.
Outside of our norm a little bit.
Yeah. American Society of Church History, American Historical Association is having their annual meeting. So it just seemed like a perfect opportunity. Greg, you're able to come over. You're not that far away.
Just
and I'm
up the
in
road.
Town. And we have with us a very special guest who's no stranger to this podcast, Kevin Burton. And Kevin, welcome to Adventist Pilgrimage.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Absolutely. And, as we've been going to different sessions, we should tantalize a little bit our listeners, these church history and history sessions. There's lots of papers going on. It's food for food for intellect, to just rub shoulders, networking. And so I'm just excited that we could get some of our Adventist scholars together and just have some fellowship. And that's a big part of what scholarship is. It's not only the intellectual part, but also just finding out who's doing research out there, right?
Yeah, because most of the time I honestly don't know what it's being done until it's been published.
Yeah.
The whole process, the fun part of it.
Cutting edge.
Yeah, you don't hear about it until it's kind of already been done, and if you got lucky, you were part of it somewhere other place. So yeah. I'm excited to hear, because Kevin's got some pretty cool stuff.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely. Well, let's introduce you properly. By the way, one of the things that I love to ask when we have these paper sessions, people, is where did you find this? What are your sources? and this is really great because I love working with archives, of course, in my role at the division with archive statistics and research. And, of course, our premier archive in the denomination is the Center for Adventist Research. Kevin, you're the director?
That's what they tell me.
And recently also has defended his doctoral dissertation.
Congratulations.
Thank
Definitely.
you. And Greg, you did as well.
I was say, within a couple weeks of each other.
Yeah, it was very close.
So newly minted PhDs here, as well as, and Kevin has done his work on abolitionism and social reform and some of these things in the 19th century. So
that's right. And
how it
connects with apocalypticism, which is kind of fun.
Part of our Adventist story.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. And so, Kevin, you're no stranger, but to this podcast, you love Adventist history. This is your passion, and I just really admire that about you. And one of the things that we have the opportunity to talk about, the last time I was at the Center for Adventist Research, CAR, as we say, a couple months ago, is I stopped by your office, and I always love to see what treasures, right? The CAR is just full of treasures that I could see a glow on your face because you had acquired over the last year or two some very special new acquisitions. And so I already see a grin on your face because I know that this just makes you happy when you find, and it had something to do with this character, Joseph Wolfe.
That's right.
Who's this Joseph Wolfe guy?
Joseph Wolfe was born in 1795 and he died in 1862. So he's a contemporary of William Miller, and he was, in a lot of ways, very much like him.
Okay.
But he is different very much too. So where they're similar is that they are both into studying Daniel and Revelation, and they both come up with this idea independently that Jesus is going to return soon in person, in the flesh, and they both set dates. And you might be familiar, if you're listening, that William Miller set the date, a rough time frame of 1843. It gets adjusted a little bit into 1844. He even allowed, though, that it could be as late as 1847. And 1847 is the year that Wolfe gravitated towards. And the main reason that they kind of differed is because they weren't quite sure of the years that Christ was on earth. And so there was some discrepancy of only about 4 years. Where they're different, though, is their Genesis and biography.
Let's talk about that in just a minute, but I want our listeners to know, where I first heard, I don't know about you, Greg, I first heard about Joseph Wolfe reading the book Great Controversy. So later, Ellen White, she'll write about him, actually almost a whole chapter, right?
Right.
You know,
that's right.
So some of our listeners, if you've never heard Joseph Wolfe, just check that out sometime. And great controversy, and so pretty amazing individual but now fill us in some of that picture. You said some of that story. This is where he's different, right?
Yeah, sure. So Wolfe was a Jew, born in Germany, and as a young boy, he's still I think even a preteen. He leaves home and he goes to what is now the Czech Republic, Prague, and he ends up enrolling or getting into a Catholic convent or. Maybe that's the wrong term.
Kind of setting, right?
Monastery kind of thing.
Right.
Forgive my slippage of terminology. In any case, he's there, and he will end up converting in 1812 and become a Catholic.
Right.
And he becomes Christian, but a Catholic Christian at first, and that's important because of the details that come later.
Yeah.
So he ends up impressing his mentors there, and ends up going to Rome. Has an audience at least once or maybe several times. Knows the Pope personally. But then shortly after he's there in Rome, I mean he's not there that long, and he's only a Catholic for a few years. Yeah. He starts to really question the doctrine of infallibility, and so papal infallibility, that is. And so he ends up
not a good thing to do in Rome.
Not a good thing to do in Rome. And so the Pope will personally banish him from the city, and he will end up leaving from there and go to Great Britain. And it's very shortly after he's there that he will become Anglican.
Right.
And he will remain Anglican his entire life. And he gets connected with other kinds of, I'll just call them apocalypticists, people who are looking for Christ's soon return, people like Lewis Way, Edward Irving, and Henry Drummond and others. And
in fact, I think Henry Drummond is the reason he goes to England, right?
Yeah, he is. He's a sponsor. He will end up being a sponsor, and for years. And so they get involved in prophetic conferences and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. But then he starts to get really interested in converting the Jews, which is connected because they believe restoration.
His family, right?
That and also these ideas of restoration of Israel kind of stuff.
Which were very prevalent in England.
Very prevalent in England, not among the Millerites. The Millerites didn't really believe that. But they did in England. And so he is sponsored by Drummond, and then he travels all over the world, starting in the early 1820s. And
so just a little bit of context before you get into the travels. I want a little bit of context for our listeners, because in the 1820s, there's a whole series of revivals of apocalypticism. You mentioned these names. They're actually having conferences. I think they call them the Albury Park conferences from Henry Drummond's estate. So it's kind of like a movement that's happening in England. And he just happens to be the kind of on the capstone of all of that. By the way, one other thing that's interesting is he sees himself in the line of some of the great Catholic missionaries who travel, and he wants to be a missionary. So this is this connecting point with him and Drummond. Anyways, tell us about some of those travels.
Well, it's dizzying, but I guess
we were talking before, like he's got to be one of the most traveled people in the 19th century.
He is, and in order to do that, especially at this time, you need to understand, like, first of all, they required expertise in language.
Right.
And so Wolfe was a brilliant man. Yeah. He was an accomplished linguist in 14 different languages.
14. I've never been able to figure out how many, but
and an expert in 6 of them.
Wow.
And so he actually says that he preached the gospel in Arabic, Persian, Syriac, Chaldean, modern Greek, Latin, German, English, Italian, and Hebrew.
Interesting.
That's phenomenal.
Good grief.
And so, but you think about it. Traveling at that time, there's no Google Translate.
Yeah.
There's no Duolingo.
Yeah.
There's no. There's not even a whole lot of people that can translate for you.
There's not even lexicons for this thing.
Right.
You can't even take a book.
He's really a genius when it comes to languages.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so he learned all of that, and that enables him to travel widely. And he goes on numerous missionary voyages.
By the way, before you go on the languages thing, one of the things I remember from reading his travels and adventures is the points made that he earns his tuition doing translation and teaching people different languages. So this is part of what keeps him going. It's not like he comes from a super wealthy family, but it allows him to actually kind of make a way for himself.
Yeah. Fun facts about him, though. I mean, he had those abilities, but he also lacked some key abilities.
Okay.
So, for example, Wolfe never learned in his entire life how to shave himself. So
What?
he literally relied on other people to shave him his entire life, including people like Edward Irving.
Yes.
Edward
Irving
shaved him.
Edward Irving shaved Joseph Wolfe, I'm sure on multiple occasions.
What?
But he tells a hilarious story, doesn't he, about this?
Yeah.
I mean, I'll give it this. It's probably a straight razor, and those are hard.
Yeah.
I've tried that.
Yeah.
That's not easy.
That's not for the faint at heart, right?
No, that's like your jugular, man, and that's...
When he first arrives at Henry Drummond's home, as I recall, you tell me if I got the story right, but as I recall, he shows up and doesn't know who Edward Irving is and asks for a barber to shave. And Edward Irving himself, the great preacher, comes in and does that. And then he says, or at least whoever compiles his wife or whatever, his autobiography later, says that for the rest of his life, whenever Edward Irving was around, that he would personally shave Joseph Wolfe.
We probably needed it if he didn't know how. So.
I'm sure, but it's kind of an interesting thing to think about, right? Because like we don't think
really
about,
weird.
It kind of reminds me. This is totally off the wall, but if totally off the wall is okay. Like
go for it.
Alexander Campbell, who was from the 19th century American Stone Campbell movement, Disciples of Christ, that kind of thing.
He's a great person, great name.
One fun anecdote about him is he kept a fish bowl on his desk. And every day, as he needed to sort of wake up, he would dunk his head into the fishbowl, literally to sort of wake him up. So there we go. We're just filled with fun facts that have no meaning or purpose.
Coffee, fishbowl. Yeah, I see it. It's water. It's all water.
There you go. We're all
Kevin,
Adventists
I
here,
never know what you're going to say, so. I know you like women. So.
I do indeed.
If you don't know what that is, you need to listen to one of our last episode with Kevin.
And remember that it was a good joke. Right?
It was. It was all in the best of... historians, I want this for our listeners to know, historians can have fun too.
We do quite a bit.
Yeah.
And we like to have fun. It's not that we have fun, we actually enjoy
We actually do, and we enjoy hanging out.
It's a good time.
And that's part of the best of history is when we encourage each other. But anyways, tell us more about his travels.
Yeah, okay, well, we'll skip the anecdote.
Tell us the anecdote.
There's one more that I do remember, and there's probably several others I don't. But,
all right.
He also couldn't ride a horse. And that's kind of important because you got to travel a lot on horseback typically. Yeah. And so he didn't know how to do that. Never learned how to do that. And so he would have to walk, instead of ride that horse.
Wow.
Yeah, whenever he's not on a boat or something else, right? So anyhow, those are the fun facts.
Well, he did ride an elephant.
Yeah, he did. That's right.
That's a bigger...
That seems harder. So, like, if you can ride an elephant,
right?
And then getting up on it, but once you're up there, it's all right.
I guess, and they've got the basket thing going around, so you're probably good.
Yeah, all right.
But just so that people know, like, I don't remember this fact right here. I'm using some notes because I can't remember all this because it's too much to remember. But here are some of the places he visits.
Yeah.
So his first trip, 1821 to 1826. Right. He goes to Palestine, Egypt, the Sinaitic Peninsula, Mesopotamia, Persia, the Crimea, Georgia, and the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah.
And he's gone for 5 years. Yeah. That's a long time.
It is.
Then 1826 to 1830, he doesn't go home and stay that long. Just a short time. He goes to England, Scotland, Ireland, Holland, Germany, the Mediterranean, Malta, the Greek islands, Egypt, Jerusalem, and Cyprus. Then 1831 to 34, he's in Turkey, Persia, Turkestan, Bokhara, Balkh, Afghanistan, Kashmir, Hindustan, and the Red Sea.
Yeah.
Then 1835 to 38, he's in Gibraltar, Malta, Egypt, Mount Sinai, Jeddah, Massawa, Kamazian, Tiger, Abyssinia, that's in Africa, Bombay, St. Helena. In the United States, he goes to at least New York City, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and Baltimore. Yeah. And so he's going all over the place. And then he takes another final trip where he just goes to Bokhara and Constantinople, and he's going there to investigate the deaths of some British noblemen, and he ends up getting captured and imprisoned and even enslaved for a brief period of time. Yeah. So he doesn't go to very many places, but this guy is traveling more widely than just about every other person alive.
I can't think of anyone that's more traveled than him in the 19th century.
It'd have to be like a sailor, like a captain of a ship or something.
Really crazy.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, but for the average, like way above the average person. But I'm sure even more than like presidents of countries and like other things like that.
Well, and nothing happened to him. Like travel.
The fact that he survived.
Travel is not easy.
And one of the things that's kind of curious is, and you read his memoirs, is all the times he has to quarantine. When he comes into port, and he'll have to quarantine again and again and again. So we think today that we have problems with epidemics and everything else, but that was just a part of everyday life in the 19th century, and definitely for Joseph Wolfe.
That's right. Maybe he had COVID.
Yeah.
All right, sorry, we can't take it down.
COVID 1, 2, maybe, not 19.
Totally kidding. It didn't exist yet that we know of. Anyhow, where do we go from there?
Travel. So travel.
You've got this guy,
yeah,
and we know about this guy, but why do we care about him at Carr?
Yeah, you're talking about the yeah.
So we mentioned the Great Controversy. So obviously Ellen White's interested in him, and so if you're an Adventist and if you disagree that he's interesting, then you're disagreeing with Ellen. No, I'm just kidding.
She clearly admired Joseph Wolfe. She had a number of his books in her library.
That's right. And so this is fascinating. That does show some significance despite the humor here. But like even William Miller, I mentioned they were contemporaries. Well, Miller knew of Joseph Wolfe, and he considered him to be sort of an ally, even though we don't know if Wolfe ever knew about
any personal contact.
Right. Yeah. And they may not have ever had personal contact, but
But Adventism was part of a global movement, even if they weren't directly aligned. So I'm thinking of Manuel Lacunza in South America.
That's right.
And Edward Irving translates or has translated his book into English.
Yep.
And just show the kind of the connections and strands of an international movement.
Right.
Joseph Wolfe will then take that and translate Manuel Lacunza's book on the Second Advent into German.
That's right.
So you have, publications that are going back and forth. And Millerites, like Himes, he knows about these Advent, Second Advent believers, whatever you want to call them, in England. He plans to go to England, but never makes it.
Right.
But there's some kind of correspondence. I mean, there's an awareness of each other, right?
And we mentioned all the travels of Wolfe, but I should add and point out here, he's preaching on the soon coming of Christ wherever he's going. So it's not disconnected from Adventism. It is part of, maybe we call it a lowercase a, Adventism. It's part of the broader thing that you're saying.
And he comes to America too.
He does. Oh, he spends quite a bit of time there.
I guess we'll get to that here in a few minutes.
Yeah, that's where he's ordained as a deacon and a bishop.
So let me clarify that.
Sorry. Yeah.
Then Wolfe is contemporary to Miller, not connected to Miller, traveling around preaching the second coming. Is he preaching the prophecies in some different way than Miller? Is he doing math and doing the tables?
Absolutely.
And all that kind of?
It's very. I mean, he's not as detailed in the table kind of thing, but he is using the same basic text as Miller and coming up with the
same logic, right?
The same logic, basically the exact same conclusion. It's literally just a difference of 4 years. He believes the two key things are the soon return of Christ and the rough date, and then also that it's a personal return of Christ rather than being some sort of non-corporeal being.
Right.
And so those things are crucial. And so they're talking about the coming conflagration of the world. Yeah. So like everything that's core to Millerism is there in Wolfe's theology.
Literal, visible, worldwide.
Right. He is the closest, probably, well, him and all of the people he's connected with, like Irving and Lewis Way and others, like they all agree. And so, virtually. And so they are the closest to the Millerites that there is. And so please understand that though we don't have a document that we know of that shows that Wolfe knew about the Millerites, I highly suspect he did. There is a lot of correspondence between the Millerites in America and those in
Europe, in England.
Point is that there was a lot of correspondence, and then of course Himes and others end up going to England, and they
after the disappointment
in 1846, and they'll meet some of these guys. And so, but before, the very first Millerite who would have met Joseph Wolfe could have been Henry Jones.
Yeah.
Henry Jones was in New York City about the time of Joseph Wolfe was there. And one person, Leroy Sunderland, who is an important Methodist abolitionist, one of the most prominent, he is really enamored with Joseph Wolfe, and he's really close friends with Henry Jones. And Sunderland will become a Millerite through Wolfe in part, and also Henry Jones. And so he gets drawn into the movement. He becomes one of the book dealers and sellers and involved in the movement in the leadership there in New York City.
Yeah.
And so those two guys are sort of the first, and that's in 1837 when Wolfe comes through there.
Interesting. Well, I wish I knew how Ellen White, she has these books in her library. Maybe you know, Kevin, but at some point she becomes familiar with him and obviously is a great admirer of his work and what he does. So
it would have probably been during the Millerite movement, like in the
very early on,
mid 1840s.
She has her chapter right along as part of that narrative.
And the Signs of the Times and Midnight Cry and other Millerite periodicals, they're filled with this kind of stuff, and they're clearly in dialogue and conversation. So when I say that we don't know that Joseph Wolfe knew who William Miller was, it's only because we don't have a document that says so. I suspect he did.
Sounds like we need to do more work on collecting some of the documents related to Joseph Wolfe.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe we now have them.
Which leads to the second part of the story.
Yeah. Tell us why you had that glow on your face when I saw you.
Yes. Well, my friends, that is because in the summer of 2022, so a year and a half ago or so,
not too.
I was poking around online, looking at stuff from rare book dealers, and I came across a sizable collection of handwritten materials from Joseph Wolfe. And I was like, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's kind of expensive, but what if? And so, anyways, after consulting with some other individuals, so that I wasn't going to drop not an exorbitant amount of money, but much more than I would ever pay for something. Much more than I would ever.
More than your average purchase, probably.
Then I got a very strong, of course we're going to try to buy this. What are you thinking? Kind of response. And so, anyways, I contacted the rare book dealer who happened to live in Paris, France, and we started to negotiate. And he was a wonderful, wonderful guy. He had been an ambassador for most of his life and just got into rare book dealing just because he was in his retirement and wanted to do it for fun.
Yeah.
But France provided a challenge. Because according to French law, anything in the country written by hand cannot leave the country unless the government approves it and signs off on it and lets it go.
Right.
And so, anyhow, we went through that process, and it took several months. It took several months I said, no, let's make sure we do it right. Let's go through the right channels. And so he worked on getting that done. He took things, set them aside for us. We actually paid for them and everything. And he was so enamored with Wolfe. This rare book dealer happened to be Jewish himself, and he was attracted to Wolfe because he found it to be so fascinating that the rare book dealer did not want to mail the materials to us. And so he actually personally flew them to America, and I met him in Chicago in October. I think it was October. Don't quote me on the date. Around there. Maybe, no, it was
October.
Anyways, I'm just impressed that he flew.
It was September because it was right around the time of Seminary Heritage Sabbath. So, anyhow, but still don't quote me on that date. It was around there. Somewhere in the fall. But anyhow, that was where the bulk of this stuff came from. But then I started to see that there happened to be a lot of other things available from other rare book dealers, and I started to say, well, hey, we have this stuff here. Let's get as much as we can to make it available. And so I contacted lots of rare book dealers and purchased everything on Wolfe that was unique that we didn't have at Carr, or that you couldn't have anywhere else. And we also went through, and there was a few of his publications that we bought that we didn't have. We had most of them already. And so, and what it turns out, as we bought those things, it is a small collection as far as archival collections go, but as it turns out, what we have at the Center for Adventist Research now at Andrews University is the largest known collection of handwritten materials related to Joseph Wolfe.
This is amazing.
That's so cool.
So you look at every other archive out there, and as best as I can tell, private collectors like you, Michael, who have several of his letters. It looks like I've been able to track down and account for about 150 letters from other archives out there. Roughly, in our collection now at Carr, we have about 150 in that collection alone.
Yeah.
And it totals to just over 1,000 pages of stuff, of handwritten material, which is far greater. The largest archive that I'm aware of, and I'm pretty sure this is pretty thorough, is the British Library. They've got about 67 letters of Wolfe at that one archive. And so this is significant. And this explains, I didn't realize, I was like, why has no one ever written a scholarly biography of Wolfe?
Because it's scattered.
It's because the papers weren't available.
Yeah.
But now there's enough to do one. And I think that there probably are still a lot more. I know there's a lot more out there.
Yeah.
And I suspect that maybe the stuff that the bulk of what we got came through the direct line of Wolfe's descendants.
Yeah. And
so it was kept in the family until just at the time of the pandemic. And then this rare book dealer got it, and then we were able to buy it. And so it came through them. And I suspect that the family, and the rare book dealer also agrees, that someone in the family may have more.
Say, because that's usually the case.
Yeah. And what it turns out is most of the stuff that we have is not They're not Wolff holographs. Now, what does that mean, right?
Yeah.
That means it's not the manuscripts that he wrote with his own pen. Mm-hmm. What happened is his second wife, Louisa Decima King, who marries him at the end of Wolff's life.
Yeah.
She went through and was copying all of these things down into letter and manuscript books.
Right.
And she was apparently working on publishing a new biography of Wolff in the 1870s. Mm-hmm. And so we have that, and it's pretty clear from the documents we have that she's copying from the originals, which may have been some actual diaries of some kind. I think there's probably several of those. As well as loose letters, manuscripts, papers, and things like that she just had and was pulling together. And so, anyhow, it's a very rich collection. Mm-hmm. So that's why my eyes were glowing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really cool to have, right?
You're literally the premier Wolff collection.
Yeah.
If anybody wants to ever research them, they got to come to you.
Yeah, that's collection. Cool. Yeah, and no matter what, even if there's a bigger one out there, we have so much that's nowhere else that people would always need to come to Andrews. Yeah, to do work.
So this rare book dealer brings the stuff. There's a whole bunch of copies, handwritten copies of key documents and so on. What key documents?
Yeah.
Tell us about the actual contents.
There's I can't list everything.
No. Give us some highlights.
Key things. Yeah, the key things. So, for example,
most important.
We have the diary of Emma Vo King. That's the mother of Wolff's second wife. Mm-hmm. It ranges from the years 1800 1852. That's a unique item.
That's good. Sure.
We also have an original manuscript called Three Dialogues that was written by Robert Walpole. Now, Robert Walpole was one of the he was a descendant or an ancestor, of Wolff's first wife. Miss Lady Georgiana Walpole, and Robert Walpole happened to be the first Prime Minister of Great Britain. So, very important figure in history.
Yeah.
We also have a very rare tract that details all of the contents of Horace Walpole's estate, who was the father of Lady Georgiana Wolff and the Earl of Orford. We have an original music score by Lady Georgiana Wolff that was prepared by her and sold to raise money for benevolent causes. And Wolff himself, as he did often, he would write notes in various different languages and things that added value, that helped, sell this kind of stuff. And so they worked together to do these kind of things. And we have one of those. And then we also have a pencil sketch of Joseph Wolfe, which maybe we need to do further work to verify and probably need to consult some kind of specialist, which is not any one of the three of us.
Right, yeah.
It very well may be the original pencil sketch that was used to make numerous engravings, because
I've seen the engravings. So
to my eye, it's like so close. The only thing that's really significantly different is the signature. And so what it appears to be is that it may be the original pencil sketch that was used to make the engraving, and they said, well, Wolff, we don't like the way your last name came out in the signature, so can you just do that part again? And so they probably blended that with a new signature.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But that's only possible.
I remember when you were showing it to me in person, it looked like you could actually see the strokes of the pencil.
You definitely can, and it appears to my eye to be. It's not a copy. It doesn't appear to be a copy.
It does look that way, but like you said, there are specialists that know this much better.
There are. In addition to that, we have numerous loose letters, many of which are holographs that Joseph Wolfe wrote himself, including one that's written while he's in Bokhara that's detailing all this rich information about these guys who got killed there. He's going to investigate that. But the biggest things, the most important things, come down to three things. There are 2 letter manuscript books, which I mentioned briefly earlier, and we have Joseph Wolfe's personal Bible that he preached from.
That's cool.
That's what I got excited when I love that. I got to hold that in my hand, and I was like, oh my goodness.
That's
Joseph Wolfe's actual Bible. By the way, it has sermon notes.
Yes.
Of course. I was going to say, is there marginalia in here?
There's 155 pages of sermon notes.
Yeah.
All of them are in English except for, I think, 1 or maybe 2 pages in Latin. And they are in Wolfe's hand. This is something that he wrote himself, and so that's very really rich. Cool. And in addition to that, there are places where he underlines key texts and verses, and you can see, you get it. If someone would go through and really look at that, you could get a really good idea of how he read his Bible, what made him.
I did that work on Bates's Bible, and you can glean so much information from what they're underlining, how they're thinking.
That's right.
It's fascinating,
including things like for Bates's Bible, especially. the sweat marks on the pages.
Yes.
You can see so many, like in key books.
Oil marks where he's rubbing it and looking at the pages all the time.
That's right.
There was an eyelash. I found an eyelash in between the pages at one point, and I'm like,
We
either that's mine or that's his. I don't know.
We're just gonna say it's Wolff's.
Probably his.
I mean, Bates's.
Yeah. It has to be Bates.
Now we got his DNA.
Yeah,
all right.
Of course.
Yeah.
We actually do have a lock of Uriah Smith's hair at car.
Okay.
Which is.
That was a thing back then.
From the Beauvais collection, right?
Yeah. We have a lot of the original stuff from Uriah Smith.
Cool. And okay, so we're talking about some of the stuff, the Bible and letter books.
Letter books, yeah.
Okay.
Very interesting stuff. And what's really significant about these is Wolff published a lot during his lifetime. He published a lot of his journals. I'm sure they were probably edited. We don't know where the original journals that he copies from are.
It's the best we have.
It's the best we have. And then there is the one that you mentioned earlier, the 2 volumes that was near the end of his life, which is
Travels and Adventures.
Travels and Adventures. It's not an autobiography, but Wolff was alive. He's interviewed. He's involved in the process. So we know a lot about his life. But this material that we have, even though there's significant overlap in some of the broad strokes, this material, from what I've been able to look at so far as I've probed into it, you get a lot more rich detail. And there's a lot of data in these documents that is not in the published sources anywhere. And so it is a gold mine for historians, and very significant. And so, for example, there is on page 4 of his missionary journal and memoir, which came out in 1827, like he has a paragraph detailing about like his education and so forth as a young boy. That amounts to a few pages in this stuff, pages 8 and 9, and there's a lot of rich detail. What do you get? You get places that are named that are not in the publications. People that are named that are not named in the publications.
Nice.
You have new examples, like we learn how the Jewish community supported Wolff during his early years of education. Nowhere in the publications is that there. We also have all sorts of colorful expressions from Wolff's own pen, like where he talks, for example, about how his moral character began to fall. That's how it's mentioned in the publication. Well, in his manuscript, it says that Wolff, he calls himself a rather wild and inconsiderate in his manners. So it's kind of minor, but you get color that's not there in the publications. More detail. So it's really fascinating. And of course, I've only been able to do very minimal probing into this. But I expect to see many things like that, and I'm sure probably significant discoveries. I mean, one small thing, it's small and yet significant, is none of Wolff's publications contain his birth date. And yet in this unpublished manuscript that we have, his birth date is there in full with a caveat. There's a question about what year he was born in. Now, I said at the beginning of this podcast 1795. I'm pretty sure that's the case from the sources and the digging that I've done. We have the full, like the month and the day here in this manuscript, which is only on his tombstone. Never published. But then the last digit of his birth year is written in pencil instead of pen. And so it was copied down. The copyist, his second wife, had some question on that point. And so
she didn't put it in any.
Yeah, and she ended up putting 1796. But based upon the descriptions that are given by Wolff himself, we know from that history that it pretty much has to be 1795 because he talks about details that happened in that year that didn't happen in 1796. So pretty sure it's 1795. But even that is there, right?
But this is not unusual in the 19th century or even late 18th century when people had questions about when they were born, you know.
Most people assume we know when Ellen White was born, and we simply don't.
And she didn't even know because she's writing to her twin sister, right?
That she doesn't even know. I mean, we're pretty darn certain it's in November, but we don't even know the day or the year. And so there is some question, and I'll be a heretic here. I think it was 1826, not 1827. And that's because we have record of Robert Harmon buying a home, or is it leasing? I think he's buying the home and property right before Ellen White would have born if it was 1826. But then he sells that property right before she would have been born if it was 1827.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
That doesn't make sense to me at all. So I think she was born in 1826 rather than 1827. But enough heresy. I mean,
heresy.
Adventist veggie heresy. I'm kidding.
Well, but I mean, this tells us sometimes we assume too much. And we have to be, as historians, we're only as good as the sources that we have, and we should be honest when we don't have conclusive 100% sources and just say, this based on the evidence we have, we are drawing these conclusions.
Absolutely.
And it's okay to say that we don't know with 100% certainty sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, back to Wolfe here. So one of these letter manuscript books, they were, as I mentioned, they were being put together to sort of write a new biography or publish a new biography of Wolfe.
Collating.
Yeah, one of them, Wolfe, is a copy of that Wolfe he started writing this himself.
Yeah.
And so we have, is it like 150 pages of an autobiography of Wolfe that he never finished.
Yeah. And it doesn't exist anywhere else.
And it doesn't exist anywhere else. And then to go beyond that, it's his wife is adding stuff from letters and stuff from his diaries and journals to try to round it out.
This is a much more comprehensive history.
It is. And so this is really cool. And there are where I think the richest data may be is Wolfe's journey to the United States. Because Wolfe actually never published a book about that trip that talks about that in detail. It is there in the Travels and Adventures, the 2 volumes.
But it's rather brief.
It's rather brief.
Yeah.
And so, but we have the second of these 2 books is devoted almost exclusively to the United States. And so you find in there, for example, that John Quincy Adams personally purchased one of Joseph Wolfe's books from him.
That's amazing.
You're thinking John Quincy Adams. I mean, we're talking about one of the presidents of the United States.
Yeah,
personally.
Right?
And found him interesting enough to want to say, hey, I want your book.
He loved Wolfe, and he was there when he addresses the House of Representatives. But you also get more detail, and it is briefly mentioned in the Travels and Adventures.
Yeah.
That he visits the President of the United States, which was Martin Van Buren, the current president.
Right.
But we get more detail about that. And we find out from these manuscripts that he was personally invited by the president to come. And he came more than once. And so this is kind of cool.
Meal, right?
And ate there and preached there.
Yeah.
And so,
at the White House.
In the White House to a private audience that the president personally convenes and organizes.
So cool.
It's really cool.
Wow.
And that detail is not anywhere.
Yeah.
And so
That seems like one you would put in somewhere. That's
I would
pretty
think
cool.
so. It is, but
That'd be on my CV.
For whatever reason, Wolfe was more interested about publishing about his ordination as a priest.
Yeah.
Which I kind of get.
It was important to him.
And he ends up working the last 3 decades of his life as a priest in Isle Brewers. So that's cool.
Right.
But for me at least, I'm like, I want to know more about the president.
Yeah. What did Adams ask you?
Right. Yeah. What did Van Buren ask you? Right.
Yeah.
So
great part of the story.
Yeah. Anyhow, so those are just some examples. And so really what we are still waiting for at the Center for Adventist Research now, you guys, is we're waiting for a good historian to come in there and write a good biography of Wolfe.
It's going to happen.
It will happen. So
that's cool.
Yep. And hope
there's
it happens
just so
soon.
many topics that are waiting for people to do research on. Everywhere I look, I keep telling people there's no reason for competition when it comes to Adventist history because there's just so much territory, virgin territory, where everywhere I look, I'm just like, oh, there's an archive. There's another collection of papers. Someone just donated a huge collection of papers to the division, and we're passing those on to the Center for Adventist Research, as you know. And I'm like, oh my goodness, that's another doctoral dissertation.
That's another very rich collection. Yeah, that deals with Ford controversy.
Des Ford and Glacier Review and stuff. But I mean, just again, everywhere I look, it seems like every week I'm like, oh, if we only had someone to write this biography or to do this dissertation topic. There's just a real richness and opportunity. So if some of our listeners are, you're thinking about going into Adventist studies, be thinking about topics like this. Wolfe would be one, but there's actually a whole slew of topics that are just waiting for people.
Oh my goodness. It is definitely, if I can just underscore.
We could do an episode.
Yeah, we could.
Just on this topic.
Not even an episode. You could have a podcast on all the different, giving people ideas of things they could write about. And you could literally do a podcast on just that.
But Joseph Wolfe is going to be...
a few, but not that
It's pretty exciting. Yeah.
It would make 5 people really excited.
Really excited.
Yeah.
Would have made me excited about 6 years ago. So.
Oh, my goodness. Well, this is such a great collection, Kevin. I'm just so excited that the center has this. And by the way, those who are listening, if you have some rare materials, perhaps even a Joseph Wolfe manuscript, I don't know, and you're like, you know what, I really think that belongs at the Center for Adventist Research as part of this Joseph Wolfe collection.
Yeah.
They can donate that to help support,
Yep.
Or maybe, I'm just putting this out there might be someone saying, you know what, I heard that kind of costs a lot of money. I would love to be able to support the Center for Adventist Research to purchase maybe another collection that might become available.
That would be wonderful. I mean, we did have to purchase the collection with donation money because we don't have a budget to
do that, right?
Do that.
I mean,
right.
So this helps to further Adventist studies. So even if you're just like, I don't have the time to go to Andrews and do this, but I would like to help encourage Adventist scholarship, this is one way they can do it.
Yep. If you're interested, please let me know.
Yeah. But especially if you have Joseph Wolfe manuscripts, though, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, Michael, we need to talk about your will.
Okay.
Because I'm sure you want to hang on to yours for now, but
for now,
at some point, I know a good home.
I have a few. I'm just going to put this out there because I don't want to die too soon here.
Yeah.
But I have identified a few select items that I anticipate should be going to the center, but let's not hurry that process along.
No.
All right.
Of course not. But
anyways.
But seriously, if anyone does have some, you could, if you wanted to for now, just send us a copy if you're willing to do that.
And that still helps further scholarship too, right?
Yeah, because someone could still save some time, and they may not know that Dr. Campbell has some letters in his collection, and so they may not know about them. But
I collected them a long time ago before I knew it was super cool.
Yeah, and actually, I'm bringing this up because you many years ago, actually, you already gave some copies of the ones you had to Carr. We do have
some, but I've gotten more since then.
I'm sure you do.
Yeah, I actually need to get some of those other ones copies too, the other ones, but and did a bibliography, and more recently I did a more extensive bibliography on the Millerites and on Joseph Wolfe. So hopefully it will help because, and this is what's amazing, it shows you over time. Like I first started on Wolfe back in the early 90s, so 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's amazing with digitization. There a lot of the same things that I found back then, still obviously they're still there, but it's amazing how much has been digitized, and even some very obscure things in libraries. Yep. And even like the Travels and Adventures of Joseph Wolfe. I remember finding my own copy in England when I was traveling as a college student in an antiquarian bookstore. I was so proud of that, and I bought this, and it was kind of expensive, right?
And you couldn't get it online back then.
You couldn't get it online, and now, and I read that through, and recently I reread it during COVID. It was I found it therapeutic to hear about all his quarantining that he had to do, during COVID.
Yes,
so
I
was reading through his Travels and Adventures. And then I looked online, and I think it's even Google Books, but someone has digitized all of it. And here I had to spend so much money to buy this, and it's still a very treasured item in my collection, 2 volumes.
Yes.
But now it's digitized. Most of the major works by Joseph Wolfe are digitized.
I think all of his books, including every edition, as I went through in this research to try to figure out what we needed to have at Carr, and I believe every edition I have a copy of digitally now.
Digitally? Yeah.
Yes, but a lot of his pamphlets, most of his pamphlets and things like that.
Yeah,
there's too many. There's out there.
Well, the Mission to Bukhara has like 47 editions, so
there's a lot.
There is a lot.
Thank you for that clarification. Yeah. What I mean is the major, like the first edition of the
major printing.
Yeah, because not every printing edition, but like they came out with like a second edition, like an official edition.
I got you.
That's what I meant.
Where there's significant changes.
Not every printing is no.
Because there's a lot. I mean, Joseph Wolfe was going. And he was a publishing extravaganza. I mean, he knew how to promote his books, and used them, as you mentioned, Kevin, to help raise money. He goes to Isles Brewers and is helping to raise money for the mission and the school and the church there. So,
which I had been told, and I think Michael, you maybe can speak to this, is I won't say what I think in my head, but. You can see Wolfe sites there today.
Yeah, I've actually gone.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just didn't want to say the wrong thing.
You can go and see his. Well, my wife and I, we went there on our honeymoon. If anyone's listening and you're kind of feeling sorry for my wife, we went and saw some literary sites as well. So we got some church history, some literary sites.
They are still happily married.
We're still happily married after 22 years now.
Yeah. Still poking around in graveyard.
And she is a historian too.
So it
works for them.
It worked for us. So but we made a stop in Isles Brewers, and we stopped at the home. And we found out about the home because we stopped by the church first, and there's a graveyard where...
You saw where he's buried, right?
Yep. And so you can see that. You can see the church. and the home is nearby. So someone pointed us to the home, and so we were able to. They were very gracious and let us take a picture of the house from the outside. So, so there are some historic sites, and also where the Albury Park Conference happened. Although that I don't know if it's quite the same anymore because they've now taken the estate and remodeled them into townhomes. So it's not quite the same, and I'm not sure if you can quite see what used to be there, but at least in Isles Brewers, there's some cool stuff. Anyways, that's a little tangent.
Yep.
But there are Adventist historic sites all around the world.
They are everywhere. And I find them, I will wake up to random text messages of people's random tombstones on my phone just because of you guys. And it's an amazing thing.
And send the tombstones to the Center for Adventist Research too, right?
Yeah.
The tombstone itself?
No, don't rob any graveyards, right?
I was about to say.
I'm just kidding.
No, we'll take the photographs and we can archive them.
There we go. All right. Just make sure there's some boundaries here on what to send to the Center for Adventist Research.
Yeah. But I mean, oddly enough, I mean there are old tombstones like that get replaced, and so if those are around in someone's private collection, that needs to be preserved somewhere, and maybe that's Carr, but maybe it could be one of the Adventist Historic Village sites, or I mean,
there's a number of archives across the division.
Yeah, so I mean, we could find the best home for it if someone had one of those.
Let us know because we're here to help, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So
that's right. We work together.
We work, and that's the beauty of collaboration. But there are some significant Joseph Wolfe sites in England, and that's pretty cool. So if you happen to be going over there, it's worth taking a moment to stop if you have the opportunity. It's way in the South England. So yeah. Well, cool. We've covered a lot of terrain here. This is a great collection, Kevin. I'm just so excited you're able to share with us. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No.
Besides making a donation to Carr?
I'm just kidding. I needed to say something smart or funny or brilliant or whatever, and nothing's coming. I'm tired.
You're on.
Well,
is that okay?
we've had a busy day here at these church history meetings, and my heart is full because I've been just learning all day and getting to meet new people and see old friends.
Well, it's close to midnight our time.
It is.
Not for Greg, but for you and I, Michael.
Yeah,
so
it is.
We're kind of struggling to stay awake over here.
Yeah.
Believe it or not.
Doesn't sound like it.
Hey, well, we've had a great time. So, Kevin, thanks for joining us, and you've been listening to the Adventist Pilgrimage Podcast. We thank you for listening as we explore and discover new discoveries. In this case, a great collection of material from our Adventist past. Until next month, join us again at Adventist Pilgrimage Podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts.
And Jesus himself said that he did not come to do away with the law.
He does not take us out of this world if he does not want us to be contaminated by